Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Module 3 discussion for TEL 701. I am Kelly here with Sandra and Kamara, and tonight we are going to be talking about our quantitative data plans. So we had a few questions that were posted to us for this week to talk about the big picture of our data plan and our top priority research question. And then we have 3 more questions. I think I'll just start off where we can just kind of like go around and answer the first question. So for the big picture of the data I plan to gather, I will say right now, and I'll get into this maybe later in our discussion, I'm not really feeling quantitative. The more I get into it, in my previous context, my past communities of practice where I was dealing with scale, quantitative made a lot of sense. Where my scope and my communities of practice have become much smaller and I'm able to sort of customize things, qualitative has started to make a lot more sense to me. So that's kind of where I am. So my primary research question at this point, my top priority, is how does playful learning affect teacher engagement in online professional learning experiences? And I feel that question is primarily going to be answered through qualitative teacher interviews and experiences as they're interacting with the professional development. I have thought about different ways where I could potentially insert quantitative methods through participation and just numbers and things such as like clicks on links and analytics of engagement with online resources. But I don't want to go too deep into that before I pass it off and let Sandra or Kamara talk about their research questions. But that's kind of where I'm at right now. I'm leaning more into the qualitative, and just for the sake of this assignment and this course, digging into quantitative, how we would conduct quantitative research and how we would analyze that data. But I'm still thinking on what that might look like.
Yeah, I'll jump in next. So thank you, Kelly. I think I'm because I'm one of those that's kind of still working on specific research questions. I know that my central construct will be sense of belonging, sense of college belonging. I'm landing on that, and the intervention itself will be some pedagogical changes that I want to make to this first year seminar course. So I've always felt like I'm going to have a qualitative aspect to it. What I've been grappling with is whether I'm going to do mixed methods or not. And I had asked Nicole this question, I think it was last week in 713. What did she say? She used this term, and I put it in a question, like that qualitative would be like the lead for me, the lead primary methodology, and that I might use some like validated surveys around college belonging that are out there. I just haven't done enough research to find the ones that I think might fit for the frame of what I'm looking at. It's not, right. So let me stop there. So, would it be worth doing some quantitative survey data collection just to ground it in what, like, how do I call this? How I explained it to her was like, I want to go off and I want to study something that may not make a lot of sense to people right now, but I also want to ground the work in using constructs that are there. So it's apples to apples, so that people in higher ed right now, so I'm thinking about like my place of work, they're looking at it and there's like a translation that makes sense. I'm like, oh, okay. So you measured college belongingness with a validated scale, but I may not be looking to use that. I might, maybe part of the research is to say that those scales don't work, that those are the wrong measures to begin with. So I'm still kind of back and forth, but I guess in a simple way, looking for constructs, survey instruments measuring the construct of belongingness is where I would probably focus any kind of quantitative work for this mixed method if I stay there. So I'll stop there, but I'll say a little bit more later.
Great. Thanks to both of you. I actually think I'm going to lean into quantitative more than I originally thought. And part of that, Sandra, is going to be a little bit of what you were just sort of alluding to in terms of your context. So as I've been working through my questions, I mean, I really think it's going to be, you know, what impact does the introduction of feminist relational theory leadership principles have on the flourishing of faculty at the Medical College of Wisconsin? So really looking at introducing leadership development from a feminist relational theory perspective, and how that is different than traditional sort of hegemonic leadership development training that we normally go through. And I think because I'm going to be doing this in academic medicine, and they really believe strongly in quantitative data and find qualitative data to be too soft, I've been thinking about the measure, the validated instruments that I can use. So I see myself leading with quantitative and then using qualitative to really be kind of the color behind it and give me a deeper sense. So I'm going to be using one measure will be the flourishing index, which really is, I don't know if it's interval or ratio. I might need a little bit of help with you guys to kind of give me a little bit of sense of that as we go through. But I'll stop there because I know we have other questions. But yeah, so.
So I want to, this isn't part of our questions, but I'm really curious because I loved hearing both of what you were talking about. And Sandra, I'm right there with you where I'm trying to decide, is it going to be, am I going to just embrace qualitative, or am I going to do mixed methods? Because you talked about, you know, leaning into constructs that exist and validation. And Kamara, you mentioned like the medical community wants quantitative and qualitative is too soft. And like, how do you feel about that? I guess like, because that's, and we've encountered that in the literature we've read, I believe too, that the whole like socio-emotional aspect of qualitative data. And I think that's why too, it pops up around critical theories, right? And like, I think that's where I've read about it a lot, is in like the critical race theory and critical theories, because the voices are important in qualitative, and in quantitative, I think that's where I feel like the voices are gone. So I don't know, that was just something that crossed my mind. But to your question, Kamara, about interval or ratio, so for me, if I go with mixed methods for quantitative, I think, like I said, if I'm trying to measure engagement, I have to define engagement. And that's where I'm stuck right now too. I'm like looking into the research on motivation and engagement theory. And there I uncovered this big argument between the academic researchers, which was hilarious to me today, where they were back and forth, and it's the cognitive versus the socio, like cultural and socio-emotional. And it's like emotional versus brain function, utility. And so like, again, attendance, just showing up to a webinar, just taking PD, is that engagement? Like that's a number, that's a quantitative number that I can measure. But when I was working with hundreds of teachers and I had to just throw out these surveys of like, what is your level of satisfaction? And that was very easy for me to create these Likert scales. But I don't know if I was getting at the heart of their voices, because that took much more time. It was harder. And I don't know, that's where I'm like leaning into the whole qualitative. But to your question about interval or ratio, I was reading through the Salkind and Fry book today. Yep. And it was talking about, I think, ratio, correct me if I'm wrong, because there's like nominal, which is just name, ordinal, which is like rank, and then there's interval and ratio, and they're sort of like on a scale of like quality in terms of like the rigor, or I don't know if that's the right word, with your data. And I think ratio,
it's their precision level.
That's it.
Right. And I think with ratio, the additional factor is if there's like a zero, if there's value to a zero, like if zero actually has a value, then I think that's like,
right.
You either you didn't grow or you stayed the same. Let's just say like there's a meaning in that null value.
Or not flourishing at all. Like you could, I think, hit zero, which is why I think the flourishing index is probably a ratio measurement. But
so Kelly, I think too, like this whole idea of qualitative, when I think about qualitative, and I like how Kamara, you said you are gonna think about leading with quantitative and then use qualitative to give color to it, right? To sort of explain.
Those voices, Kelly, I think, as you were saying.
And I think that I think, Kelly, what we were learning from our critical theory focus, right, is that a lot of these measures are, I guess the right word is hegemonic, right? A lot of these measures are standard, normative in what has been really, which is, white male dominant thinking and paradigms, right? So even like this one model of belonging that I'm looking at, that I think is the model that I'm thinking about mostly to center work on. It only came out like 2016. It says basically when you're looking at a model of college belonging for privileged students versus minoritized students, there are additional factors for minoritized students. It's not just things like fitting in and being comfortable, which is for everyone, but for minoritized students, there's two extra constructs of safety and respect, which is sort of like not necessarily it's not that it's not of value, but it's almost like a given if you are of privileged backgrounds, I suppose. Like, so just to deconstruct that. So if you're calling the question on maybe saying like, maybe the measures we're using aren't even right, then I think you might lead with qualitative. But then I also, like you said, like I want to go and maybe play with a little bit of the quantitative just so I can get attention. Just like, and I don't know if that's right or wrong. I think that's what I was trying to ask Nicole. Like, I just don't want people to look away. Maybe I don't, who cares? Like, why am I even worrying about that? But I'm thinking about that because of this action research, like I'm going to use this as soon as it's done, I hope, to do something with it at school. I don't know. I could be off.
I mean, I'll be honest, and I mean, maybe I shouldn't care, but I really do like academic medicine is where I'm hoping to make the impact, right? So when I've been talking to Brian about how I'm going to set up my intervention, I feel like, we've talked about making it as much of like a control group A, group B, like as much of a treatment, right? Whether quantitative or qualitative is what I gather, but as much of a treatment as to what they would find to be like as close to their scientific standard as possible, so that I get listened to. Because I think at the end of the day, I really would like to have impact, right? And I could do it a different way and still have it be valuable, but it makes it that much harder to sort of like bang on the doors. And this way, I just feel like maybe I can get there faster. So.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that for either of you. And if that's what makes sense, and especially the way you're describing it, Kamara, it definitely sounds like quantitative. Interestingly enough, in my scenario, I think I felt the reverse, where I feel like in my educational context and working in an equity and education organization and where I am, I think I'm actually going to be listened to more by leaning into the qualitative, because that's like my community now. And like we do storytelling, we do blog posts, and we don't publish this hard quantitative data because we're trying to, when you're looking at closing the achievement gap, in the digital divide, yes, you can quantify things, but also there's stories there. And I don't know. So I find it really interesting how we've all evolved like in our different ways with our pops. Okay, going back to our questions now, because we've kind of answered a lot of these. I know a lot of our peers in their discussion posts, they kind of showed a table where they described the quantitative variables and the different levels of measurement. We've kind of talked through this. I don't have a table, but if either of you have something that's already set up, you sound pretty like formalized, organized with what you kind of described, Kamara.
I mean, I know that I'm going to do the flourishing index. I do need to find another sort of leadership scale that I'm working with some folks in the business school that I partner with to just sort of see what they might, because I'm going to be comparing traditional leadership training with flourishing. So I'm going to do them both and then compare the difference. But I do also, I do plan to gather some demographic data, right? So junior faculty, female faculty versus male faculty, especially when I'm looking at feminist relational theory, I feel like some of those things are going to be really important to look at. So I see myself translating even some of that demographic info into like SPSS and code it, kind of like we did last semester with some of that work. And then, again, I just don't know. I don't know exactly what tests I'm going to run on it yet. Brian and I have talked about a lot of that, and some of it, I feel like I was like, whoa, I need to be further along in this class before I understand what he's talking about. But I think it will be fun, to learn a little bit. It scares me, as I said, Kelly, when you and I were talking last time, but I think it'll be good to sort of lean into it.
Yeah. When you mentioned, my brain just like, I lost it, but you mentioned something that made me think of something where potentially I am going to consider,
Coding the gender and
coding, that was the word. Okay, so coding is where I can see potential in my communities of practice, particularly, even though I've told you all that like my context now is smaller. So what it is I shifted from a grant where I served hundreds of schools and thousands of educators across the United States, like one grant funder. Now I'm working with it's really more than four, but I have four main projects. But within each of those projects, I work with small cohorts of educators. I work with a cohort in one project with just six educators from six different schools. Another cohort is going to be like 10 educators. The biggest one I have is like 22 educators. So my question for my research, which is also sort of driving my chair crazy because I'm explaining to him my grants last for a year. Usually they renew, but they may not renew. So like I have to like create this dissertation proposal, and hopefully I will have, and it's not going to be the same cohort. I don't have any cohort that's like a 3-year cohort. It just doesn't work that way. That's not how it works. But to your point of coding, if I, instead of being like, it's this grant, it's this specific community, if I were to combine all of mine, because everything I do is in the realm of peer-to-peer professional learning. All of the professional learning I'm doing is with STEAM educators. Like that's like the common thread. And so if I were to do interviews across different cohorts, as those cohorts changed, then I could have this like codified, like a coding process where the quantitative might make more sense. So I think that's where I'm seeing it as a potential.
Mhm.
Finally, our last like little point of question, if we want to say, is just to share about plans or ideas for quantitative analysis, like what you'll do with the data. And I think I kind of just did that. So like based on what you were saying, that would be my plan for using it essentially. So I don't know if there's anything else that either of you want to add about any other plans, ideas, or thoughts or questions to wrap us up.
Yeah, I might just say that in my cycle 1, I did some t-tests and I did some correlations to look for statistically significant change in flourishing levels based on it. So I would see myself continuing to run some of those same tests. And then again, I'm hoping to learn enough to be able to start to compare some different groups too. So how did the female junior faculty versus male junior faculty, or male female senior faculty, right? So I'm hoping to do a little bit of that without getting, crazy, but if I can learn how to do some of those correlational tests, that would be my plan.
That sounds good, Kamara. I'll be curious to see like what your sample size is. I think that's one of the things that I'm worried about too, is the size of sample, for us to run quantitative. The other thing I guess when I think about the belongingness scales, if I do anything, I was thinking about it this afternoon. I'm like, I don't know if it's in a quantitative perspective, maybe it's definitely catching all the demographics, right? All of the, what semester are you in school, race, ethnicity, age, gender, or do you belong to a special cohort? And I would be looking at that to see if they get any other wraparound services, any other like belonging type focused experiences outside of the class. Did you complete the class and your level of attendance? Those two are the ones that I'm thinking might be interesting. Let's just say hypothetically, like those students that attended all of, or those students that may have attended more of the class were exposed to more of those, whatever changes I'm making to the experience, right? So one might argue that those students are going to have a higher sense of belonging than those that maybe skipped class. Like just that simple. Like that's as far as my brain could take me on this today. But like I said, I just haven't looked enough at the literature on belongingness scales. So that's what I've got to start doing next. So
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us for our discussion this week on our quantitative plans. And we look forward to talking to everyone, not next week, but the week after in our next discussion. We'll talk to you then. Bye.
Bye.